And good morning, everybody. We're live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. It is Friday. You survived everything you went through this week, the travails, all the grief, all the technical issues with StreamYard that we have to deal with. But we're here. We are here, and we are so glad that you're here as well. My name is Bryan Armitrout, and I'm with the Food Leadership Group based here in Loveland, Colorado, with my good friend Austin Welch of Sage Media, who's also out here in Colorado. How you doing, Austin?
Doing good, man.
Awesome. Yep. So one of the things that's always fun with doing these live streams every week is we get on a little bit early because it almost seems like every other time that we're on, there's always some type of a little technical thing that happens, but we made it. So if you're brand new to the food safety chat, what we've got here is exactly that. It's a chat about food safety. And every week at this time, so 10 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Mountain, where we're at, we have a live stream and I bring on an expert to talk about topics in food safety. So this is an hour to kind of get together. And what's really cool about this is we call this chat on purpose, because with this conversation, that's exactly what it is. This is not us lecturing to you. This is hopefully us transferring some information, and even in the chat, sharing information with other people as well, which is what really makes this cool, right? We're putting together a community on this and talking about food safety because we all improve together. Food safety, not a point of competition. And of course, if you're familiar with this chat at all, you know when we have Austin on, it's always a good show. Austin, with his company Sage Media, is doing some absolutely fantastic stuff in the world of training. So always really great to talk with Austin and see what new cutting edge things he's working on. And so Stephanie is here. And if you didn't catch it earlier this week, Stephanie was on with Jill and Tia with Catalyst, talking about what she does around recalls and food safety as well. So if you're not familiar with Stephanie, check her out. She's doing some amazing work as well. And that's always what's really fun about this chat, is the connections that we make and the new integrations and the new people that we can bring in to help us with problems that we may be having. And Allie, good morning to you. Nice to see you in lovely San Diego. So part of what we do with the chat as well is we let us know where in the world you're at, like Alexis did here as well. Stephanie is actually in Germany, so it's really great that she can join us. Claire went to CSU. We went to the CSU Wyoming football game. So you're familiar with that, right? So Wyoming was victorious and retained the golden boot for another year. So go Pokes. That's my alma mater. Alva, nice to see you. Very good this morning. So it's always amazing with these chats, Austin. The people all over the world that join us on these chats, and we're just really fortunate to be able to talk with them.
Definitely.
So
yeah.
There we go. So one of the things,
if you're
routine. Jennifer, good to see you, and Megan. Oh, awesome. Tri-Cities, Washington, pretty area too. All these awesome areas in the world. That's always what's so fun about traveling is going to see all these new places and experiencing life in these new areas. So before we dive into the topic, which of course anybody who watches knows I'm always super anxious to get that, there's a critical step here, Austin, that we need to do before we begin. And everybody, please join us for a drink of your favorite beverage here this morning. Cheers. Wonderful. Sounds like Lawrence Walters.
You back to coffee this week?
What's that? No coffee this week. There's just water in the mug. I'm doing the Invisalign things here on my teeth. So they don't like heat, right? Because it's 3D printed plastic, so you don't want to deform those. And also, I would imagine I get coffee in them, which would look pretty gross. So water,
yeah,
water it is. So today is a really interesting topic, and really this is kind of a sneak peek behind the scenes of something you've got coming up at the Center for Foodborne Illness. So I think before we even dive in here, it's great to kind of set up that framework for people so that they know that. So what's the course? And I'll put the link in here for everybody that the material we're talking about today references.
Oh yeah. So once a quarter we do a virtual course with the Ohio State University, and this is a day-long course.
Oh, Austin froze on my side. Hopefully he gets back here. Oh, you kind of froze up there, Austin, just when you were starting to explain the course.
All right, give me a second. I'm gonna I'm going to try to log in with my phone because it keeps glitching up on me here.
All right, I'll continue talking about this as well. Let me throw a link in here too for the locals group. I'll kind of explain that if you're new to the locals community. So locals is a free app that you can have on your desktop or your phone. And there are different groups in there and different people who talk on different subjects, and it's free. And we've built a group for food safety. So one of the things that you will see there, getting some feedback there. Oh, there we go. All right. So it looks like let me add you to the stream. There we go. Gotcha. Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
There we go. Okay. So hopefully, guys, you've got this fixed. Give me a thumbs up or something in the comments here to let us know if that's better. As we all know, in the post-COVID world of Zoom and everything else, these things kind of happen. You just got to go with the flow. So to finish up on the locals group, I put the link in there for that as well. So you can join that for free. And, once or twice a week or so, I'll go through the information on recalls and food safety and what FDA is up to, right? They had an enhanced traceability webinar this week, for example, and I'll post those in there so you've got a nice reference. And it also will then automatically email you when I do that, so you can keep up to date on what's going on in the world of food safety, which is pretty cool. And so let's swing back around then to the really cool part with your course then, Austin.
Awesome. Hopefully this works better. So we once a quarter we do a virtual food safety culture design workshop. So it's an online program that we designed in conjunction with the Ohio State University, we basically kind of utilize some of what we're talking about today as a framework to design these food safety culture strategies, really looking for creative and innovative approaches to both ideating around issues that might be problematic, as well as developing specific solutions to those issues, because obviously no two food cultures are the same. So everybody has their own kind of unique issues. So on January 19th, we'll be running the next cohort. If you get some value out of this, then you might be interested in jumping onto the day-long session that we're going to be doing.
Good. And I think what's really valuable, and you get this if you're new to Austin's work at Sage, is that he's taking an approach and bringing an outside perspective into food safety and food safety training and how we improve processes and food culture and all these type of things. That's really new and refreshing, right? Because one of the things I think we can all agree on is PowerPoints. PowerPoints are so boring, right? And it's not a good way to share information, and people don't retain it. And we all know these things, right? And just because you give somebody a test at the end doesn't mean they're actually retaining that information. So we're going to actually dive in around creative problem solving, which is an amazing topic, right? Because part of this is that it's one of the challenges in quality assurance and food safety is that what happens in production facilities, and we've all seen this, is that something happens, people start saying, oh, well, we had a quality problem, right? Which irritates me to no end. There's no quality problem. There was a manufacturing problem. And say, okay, well, we need to figure out what happened and get to root cause and do fishbone diagrams and all these tools in our toolbox that we're familiar with. But a lot of it too, right, is getting the time and coming with the processes and getting everybody else involved, right? This is not like everything else that we talk about on this chat. Food safety culture is not the responsibility of quality assurance. It's the responsibility of the organization. And quality assurance is one of the groups that helps facilitate that, but it is not our responsibility. And a lot of times this gets pushed off onto the quality group. And anybody who's worked in quality assurance for any period of time knows that when you have a deviation with a supplier or a co-man or even one of your own plants, Austin, is that you'll say, hey, listen, we had this defect in the product. We need you to get back to us and let us know what happened and what you're going to do to fix it. Well, a lot of times you'll get responses back and they'll be only within a few days. And you're like, that's a really fast response. And the response that comes back is, yes, we've identified root cause, and the root cause is we need to train the individual responsible for this process. Right? All that tells me is they're BSing me and they're wasting my time, and they didn't do anything because the training was pretty much, they went down to the floor and said, hey, listen, we just got a complaint from our customer. Don't screw up again. Right? That was the training. And we all know that doesn't work, and we all know it's a bunch of crap, and it's just so annoying. Um, and a lot of times, and I think this kind of gets then to the gist of our conversation today, which is, can technical people find solutions that creative? Because I hear this excuse all the time. It's like, oh no, I'm an analytical person and I work in quality assurance and I work in data and numbers. I'm not a creative person. My job is to find creative people and then whip them into shape. Right? So can technical people be creative, Austin?
Absolutely. And I think this is one of those myths that began, unfortunately, when we were much younger. Usually as children, we start to get divvied up into these categories of, well, you're good at this thing, but not so great at this thing. And I remember, like, as a child, I wanted to be an astronaut. Right. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and NASA was right there. And I was fascinated with the space program. And I remember I had a teacher once, and I was telling her I wanted to be an astronaut. And she was like, well, with those math grades, you're probably not going to get there, because you got to be really good at math. And so, like, that stuck with me, where it was like, well, I'm not good at math. And then therefore I'm not that great at science. So I need to invest all my eggs over here into this creative basket, And so I got into music and photography and writing and things like that. But, so I'm guilty of the same thing. Like, I think I'm not a technical person, because that I kind of made that decision a long time ago, and that's not true either.
Yeah.
So yeah, inherent in just human trait is that we are creative. Like, we're always creative and trying to find new solutions and new ways to improve process and procedure. I think one of my personal little silver bullets, or my tool to my success, is that whenever I get hired to try to figure out a problem, I have to be creative at the drop of a hat. Right? I can't wait for the muse to strike and spin forever coming up with a solution. So I have a process that I use, and that my partner uses at Sage Media, for when we come into any project. And it's like, okay, well, we need to find what the actual issue is here, and then we need to develop a solution. So how do we do that? And we always go back to this same framework that comes from, it's actually from a company called Foresight. And so there was a professor who'd been doing research around creativity and how to develop these creative processes. And then he helped found this company called Foresight that kind of helps teach people this process that he utilized. And his name is Gerard Puccio. So if you ever happen to come across, if you happen to have a subscription to the Great Courses, which is a really cool online education platform, there's a course on this around creative problem solving and that was kind of like what really got me started on this endeavor and really mapping out the process. So wanted to kind of share some of that process today. These are the deep secrets of Sage Media. So of how we do what we do. And I want to be able to share it, because this is something that everybody is capable of. It's just having the tools ready makes it so much more accessible.
Oh yeah. Show me a child who's not creative, right? All children are creative, right? They're drawing and building forts and playing, you name it. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a chef, right? Because I watched Three's Company and I thought, wow, that's really neat what Jack Tripper does, right? He's making all these cool foods and making people, that'd be really cool, right? And so that was the thing for me. And I remember I was in the 8th grade and I took an art course, and there's some pretty good artistic talent in my family. And I did this painting, and in retrospect, I'm sure it wasn't very good, right? But it was kind of a Bob Ross type painting, right? So you had the mountains and the trees and the stream, right? And these type of things. And I was super proud of this painting. And the teacher of the course asked me to, contact my parents, and she wanted to bring my parents in for a talk. And I was like, ooh. And my parents came in for the talk, and she accused my dad of doing the painting. And she's like, the students need to learn how to do this themselves. So, and I'm like, and my dad's like, no, he he painted this 100%. I didn't do anything. And so that made me, really even, puffed me up even more. And I gave it to a favorite aunt and uncle, and they had it for a long time. And it's interesting. Your point is right. There's certain points in our life where people say, right. And no. You need to focus on real world things. And you need to, of the lessons we were taught as children, right? Is you need to thinking about a stable career, right? And then they beat the creativity out of us, right? And
that's exactly it. And they've actually done studies around this. How they measure genius is based on how many different potential ideas and solutions you can come up to unique problems.
Yeah.
And most children, like over 90% of children, kind of rank in that genius level because and we're going to talk about today why that is and how we can kind of get back to that. But yeah, there's so many restrictions that are placed on us and that we place on ourselves that we start to lose that, that genius level thinking. And so that's what we're trying to always kind of get back to. But it's really, it's it's unpacking all this baggage that we usually carry. And we'll talk about some of that today as well.
When you look at entrepreneurs, so Elon Musk and all these guys, that it's the ability to link these seemingly disparate things together and create something new. I was watching a comedian on TV last night, and he was talking about different companies and how they started. And he said, well, Netflix, right? Netflix was born out of somebody who said, this Blockbuster thing's really a kind of a pain in the butt, right? Having to go there, and maybe they have the movie, maybe they don't, and there's late fees, right? And there's this post office over here that delivers things, right? And connected those two things together. Amazing, right? Just that, and these are not. Whenever something like this happens, right, we all see this pain and we just deal with it. And those people, right, and creative people who are thinking, right, I don't want to say that those people, we're all creative, though they're able to make that connection that we don't necessarily see. And that's building that creative muscle. And that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. So kind of my first question around this, Austin, is have you found that there's some people in your trainings and working with different groups that there's certain people that latch onto this process and this building up this creative muscle more than others, or any patterns?
So there's the most common patterns is the type of creative aspect that they're drawn to. So what's cool about the creative process is that it's a process, and that the way that we look at it is through these 4 different stages, right? So the first step within the creative problem solving is to clarify what our challenge is, what exactly are we confronting. Second step is to generate new ideas. Third step is to develop a solution based on those ideas, and then the 4th step is to implement action. Very simple framework. Most people are drawn to one or more of those 4 phases, right? So some people are drawn to clarifying the issue. That's me. I am that person who's constantly asking why. I want to get to the actual root problem that we're dealing with, because that's what fascinates me. Then once that problem is clarified, you move into those generating ideas. Well, some people are really drawn to generating ideas. I'm not one of those people. Thankfully, my business partner is, and he will come up with all of the really kind of out there ideas and stretch to come up with that. And then when you move into the next step to develop the solution, that's the actual building out of the thing, of the solution. And some people are really drawn to that, right? They don't want to ask the questions. They don't want to come up with the specific ideas. But once that work has been done, it's like, okay, I really enjoy developing the solution to it. And then there's people who are drawn to the 4th step, which is the implementing the action, right? So a lot of times we'll see people in sales, right? So salespeople are big on implementing action. They want to get out there and get things done.
Right.
And that's, so in our business, I'm really drawn to clarifying the challenge, and then the final step, which is implementing action. So I want to clarify what's going on, and then once we've created everything, I want to make sure that we hit the ground running, and then we get this rolled out and implemented as quickly as possible. So yeah, I would say like, for everyone who's listening, I would say like, think about that for a second and ask yourself, because it's not that you don't like doing these things or that you're not good at it. It's that what what are you inspired by, or what gives you energy, as opposed to
Mhm.
what seems draining, right?
Yeah.
So like clarifying the challenge to me is like super exciting. My partner is bored to tears at that process because it's so tedious to him,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like, that to me, that inspires me and gets me excited. And I'm like, I look forward to the front end consulting with our clients to really dig in and figure out what it is that the issue is that we're dealing with. But Richard will be super um, motivated by generating the ideas,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes I'm not in that same headspace. So it's asking yourself which one of these four you feel like really motivates you or that you get inspired by.
Yeah, these guys, right? A little sneak peek there for you guys. And I think that's a really good summary, Austin, because part of this too, as you're explaining all this, and I think part of this, right, goes back to the failures in corrective actions and things that I was talking about, is if only one person is doing this. So if I'm the quality manager in the plant and I'm trying to take on all four of these roles, I'm not good at all four roles, right?
Right.
So I may be a idea, implement, clarifying the challenge type person. It's like, okay, well, we've had this customer complaint. We need to focus in and figure, really get to the root of what's going on here. Well, if those following steps now, I get no energy from that and I'm really bored by it, it's going to stop, right? Or I'm going to skip to retrain employee. And everybody's going to go, right? And we've all seen this. We've all seen this in life. And so I think a good analogy of this, right, is like introverts and extroverts. I'm an introverted person, and death for me is going to a cocktail party and standing around and talking with people. Oh, what are you? But you'll notice on these live streams, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
that way, right? Introverted people love giving presentations. It's kind of this weird paradox. I have no problem at all getting in front of large groups and talking about things like this. But afterwards, the chitty chat is the part I struggle with, right? So I get energy from doing this, and then that energy gets pulled away from me in the small talk type conversations, right? And you have to be aware of this enough within your personalities to figure out, okay, yeah, this is where I get my energy, and this is what takes my energy. And with those four groups, right, building out your team, right? So if I'm a quality manager in a plant, Austin, I'm going to want to find for this team that's going to be looking for creative solutions for a challenging issue. I want to bring in a group of people and then find out who fits into what group, right? So if I'm starting the meeting and say, okay, well, here's the issue that we're working on, here are these type of things. And then if one or two people in the group start saying, okay, well, this is all great, but we need to really focus in and clarify what we're actually talking about here, because I think we've got several different issues. Oh, there's my clarifiers, right? Those, okay, good. And then some other people start going, okay, well, that's great, but we need to really think outside the box and just start generating ideas around this, because I think a lot of times we just jump to a conclusion, and that's not the right way to do things. Yes, you're 100% right. That's my idea, people, right? That's my idea, and et cetera, right? Developing solutions and the implementation. And right, I think kind of the textbook example of an implementer in a company are the project managers, right? That's their world, right? The project managers, that's all they do, right? Their whole purpose is to figure out the most efficient way to get things done and keep these different people in their correct lane so that things move forward.
Definitely. And to take that a little bit further, sometimes when we are running these types of creative problem solving sessions with a client, when we get to the ideation side, we might actually excuse some of the people who are really big on implementation,
Ah,
because and this will kind of get us into our next step, which is the divergent and convergent thinking process of like
uh-huh,
how we brainstorm ideas and then how we converge on a solution.
exactly.
Because sometimes the implementers will be like, we need, we just need to move forward, and it's like, well, we need time to actually ideate on these solutions. Because the other thing that we've really found is that when trying to come up with solutions, the first
1/3 to 1/2 of the ideas that come up are predictive. They're anticipated. It's ideas that have been bouncing around in your head for the past 6 months, 3 years, decade.
Uh-huh.
These are low hanging fruit, right? You're just writing down the stuff that comes to you. Part of the creative process is to stretch, just, and it's just like building any other muscle, and to say, okay, well, now I've done the easy stuff. Now let me push and continue thinking about what are other solutions that I haven't thought about. And now you're actively thinking, right? You're not just regurgitating stuff that comes up. So it's really interesting whenever we're trying to come up with ideas to see that the best ideas usually come from that last third of things. So it's like I'm writing out all these different potential solutions to this problem, or even writing out potential problems, right? And it's like the initial problems are like, like you said, it's like, oh, we need more training, or we need this, this kind of plan, or what. And it's like, but then they get to the bottom and they're like, well, actually, like HR isn't vetting our people properly. Like and so maybe, so it's not a training issue and it's not an environmental issue. It's like, maybe we need to go back and look at our onboarding process. So starting to really stretch beyond the typical problems and solutions that you would normally come up with.
Right. Huh. Very interesting. Yeah. Because something I saw in the past when you have these type of group environments where you need to come up with solutions or look at things creatively, is some things that you need to watch out for is people who keep their authority hat on, right? Because part of this, right, and we all know who've been through this, right, is like, no, we're all equal here. Managers, supervisors, line workers, it doesn't matter. Everybody's ideas are valid. And I remember there was, I worked with a plant manager who was particularly opinionated, right? When plant managers, right, that's why they're successful as plant managers, right? They're very good at decision-making and execution and keeping track of a myriad of things that can happen in that facility. And he was on a team. Then we were looking at some issues. And I had some line workers that I brought onto this team who were very happy to be there. And we're working through an issue and things like that. And one of them, she was just lighting up. She's like, oh, well, what about this and this? We should look at that. And he rolls his eyes and goes, and she shut up.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't say a word after that point. And so I kicked him off the team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I said, I told him, I'm like, you're inhibiting this process because you have ideas of what the decision already is, and you're driving everybody toward that. And he didn't even realize that, right? It was just, it's just a blind spot. It was part of his personality, and he wasn't aware that he was doing that. And he wasn't offended, right? And I explained to him what had happened, and he was like, oh, right? He didn't even know it, right?
Right.
And we all do that, right? We all do that.
And because we have a gut reaction, and this is, once again, it's the evolution of human beings. We've gotten really good at assessing a problem and then coming up with deciding on a solution and judging whether or not that solution will be good or not. Uh-huh. And whenever we're trying to come up with new ideas, we have to defer judgment. And that's the hardest thing to do. So I was talking about the divergent and convergent thinking. So in each step, each of these steps, right, whether we're clarifying or, developing or implementing these different elements, we're always want to take time to think divergently, which, divergent thinking is simply just the ability to see as many potential solutions as we possibly can. And so going back to talking about children who, are at that kind of genius level versus adults. So divergent thinking exercise, a typical one might be like, here's a paperclip. I want you to write out as many potential uses for this paperclip as you can come up with. Right. And so a typical adult might come up with, 20, 25, 30 solutions. Genius level divergent thinkers will come up with 200.
Wow.
Because they start to look at what is possible and not be constrained by what they're holding in their hand. They go, well, could it be 50 feet and made out of rubber? Right. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then we could do this with it. And so they're going beyond, because within divergent thinking, there is no bad thoughts. There's no, because we are completely deferring judgment. And this is one of the hardest things, because we are so hardwired to think of something and then immediately judge that on whether or not it's good or not. And that's what that employee did, right? He didn't realize what he was doing. He was just like that's the mode that we're in, is that we hear something and then we immediately judge, well, that's stupid, or that's great. And so, when we're going through this creative problem solving, we have these sessions around divergent thinking, and it's very much a brainstorming process. What we see happen a lot with brainstorming sessions is that they're not structured properly. So when we see that people say, well, brainstorming doesn't work or it doesn't produce solutions, it's usually because there's not a structure in place for spending time specifically on divergent thinking, right? Which is where we're going to come up with as many solutions as possible. We're going to defer judgment, right? No one's going to judge the idea. It's a brain dump on the board. But then also we're going to look for ways to make connections. So like you said, Blockbuster and the US postal system, Netflix, that is making a connection between two different things and saying, well, here's the new thing that we can create. And this is so much of what I do with storytelling, as I go, well, here's the issue that we're facing within this company. What's an analogous story that I can create that will connect this information in a new and creative way that's not so on the nose? I'm looking for ways to create and make those connections. And then the other thing that we're looking for in divergent thinking is to strive for quantity, not quality, right? We want to just push and push and push and push. And that, because like I said, it's those last third ideas that are usually the really good ones, because those are the creative ideas. Everything prior to that is just stuff you've been thinking about forever. And then we want to, we want to really seek novelty. And that's another complicated one for people, because we tend to think safe. We think, what is possible? We're deferring judgment. We're not asking what's possible, right? So it's like, okay, well, if I had a $50 million budget to fix this, what would I do? Or if I had an infinite amount of time or team or resources, but it's like, because we're not talking about whether or not this is possible yet. We're just talking about what is out there and how do we start to seek that novelty. And so the divergent thinking sessions, that's where all of this kind of comes together, and we just get all of that stuff mapped out. So a lot of times when, I'm running like a workshop or a cohort, I'll have a sheet, and say, okay, now we're going to think divergently about like all the safety hazards or risks that you can think of within the organization. Don't think about just your department, out the entire organization. What is a list? And we're going to just spend the next 10 to 15 minutes writing that out. And then we have our massive list. And then the next step is once we have that, well, now we need to converge. We need to start to figure out what are the best solutions within this massive list.
So I would imagine then, well, number one, a couple of questions coming out of this as well is, so obviously you need a facilitator for this process, right? So somebody who's kind of leading these conversations and saying, okay, guys, let's kind of work on some divergent thinking now and leading this process. Is that how it works? Or
ideally, yeah. You definitely, because I think one of the biggest things that a facilitator does in this point is to not accept the ending when everyone feels that it should be done. It's like having a fitness coach. It's continually pushing until people are ready to throw a stapler at them, and then it's like, okay, now we're done. Because, but I mean, yeah, I'm trying to think. I've never, because that's a great question. I've never had somebody try to facilitate this without like an actual background in the process. But the process is easily learned. It's like easily learned, hard to master type of thing, right? Like I myself am still working on this, right? Like I continue to struggle with divergent thinking because
Well, and
I'm
I
a
think too,
judge.
it comes down to, right. So for that trainer, right, or that person who's running the session,
Mhm.
they're going to fall into these groups too, right? They're going to be a clarifier or an implementer or things like that. So they're going to have a preferred section of this process that they want to focus on. And
Mhm.
part of what I think a theme that's coming out of this as well too, right, is self-awareness, right? And being aware that you have blind spots. You're strong in one area. Well, guess that means you're weaker in other areas. And so let's say that you're a team leader who's very good at generating ideas in this process. Okay, great. Well, then you need to be super aware of that and make sure that you're including other groups, because part of that, right, is if you're an analytical person, you love other analyticals, right? Yeah, all that Austin, he gets it right. He's got the numbers and the data and the graphs, and that guy, he knows what he's doing. I like Austin, right?
Mhm.
Not that like that other flaky creative person, Cheryl over there who's doing stuff. Right. And so then you end up with a group of analyticals, and guess what? Nothing gets done because
Yeah.
they all sit around and analyze everything all day long, and it just sits there. It's the same thing.
Well,
By the way, Alba, you'd asked for a link for the course here in the comments. It's just a little bit above you, so that you can scroll back through the comments, and the link to Austin's courses in there as well as the locals. So if you can't see that, please let me know. A couple of comments here as well here as we're thinking about this. So Cheryl has a great story here, right? My high school asked what we wanted to do when we went to college, and she wanted to be a farmer or a truck driver. Well, no, you should think about careers that my parents did, because that wasn't a realistic goal, right? Just what we're talking about, right?
Mhm.
Destroying her dream. So 4 years later, I graduated in dairy science and worked for dairies and transitioned into quality with many different foods. So just don't accept what you're told, 100%, right?
Mhm.
And part of this, right, as we look back on our lives, we think we've got it all mapped out when you're a kid, right? So, I'm going to do this and this and go to college. Show me one person that your life where you're at right now ended up where you thought.
Right.
No, never, right? We think we're in control, and there's other factors and other things that move us along in this stream of life, and it's never what you think, and that's part of the fun, right? And so being able to step back and recognize that.
Definitely. Yeah, and going back to your last comment about people having their different strengths and weaknesses within this, and this is why we talk about the concept of creating a food safety culture coalition, right?
Yeah.
A team of people, because like you said, the quality person cannot fully own the complexity of this topic of food safety culture. It's not a one person deal.
No.
Just like creating really innovative solutions rarely involves one person, right? We have this myth of like the genius entrepreneur who came up with this, Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or any of these other guys, but ultimately they had a team of people that are working on these ideas with them. That none of this is created by a singular person, nor should it be, because as you move into that convergent thinking, people we need to start actually making realistic judgments on, is this viable? Is this real? Can we make this happen?
Yeah.
So yeah, the having more than one person trying to come up with this stuff is great, because like you were talking about earlier, like I'm energized by the clarify aspect of this, and so I run that session in Sage Media.
Yeah.
But then when it gets to divergent thinking, I turn that over to my partner, because he's a great coach at that. He's the one who's like, I'm not going to accept what you say until we push and push and push and you feel like you're about to break. And and he does that to me, and I get frustrated, but like he pulls it out of me somehow, right? And then it's like, he's like, there it is, there's the idea, like you came up with it. But it takes that coach to kind of push, because we think our first ideas are genius.
Yeah.
and they rarely are they.
Oh boy, that's a good lesson, because that's one of the things that I've learned with having my own business, is that we all think that our own ideas are wonderful, right? And then the industry and the marketplace teaches us whether it is or not, right? And that can be a very painful lesson. I know that from personal experience, right? You have to be able to understand that side. And I would guess too, right, as you're going through this process in plants, Austin, and this is just a particular example that I'm using for this, but obviously you can use this in all kinds of applications, is that those creative ideas, I would bet, rarely come from the same person, right? They're going to pop from all kinds of different people in the location.
Definitely. And there's, and this is getting a little woo woo, but it's interesting because sometimes there's new ideas that seem to kind of be like floating in the ether, right? So it's like when the telephone was invented, right? It was invented here in the States, but then like right around the same time, another guy invented it over in Europe.
Yeah.
And they had no communication between each other, Alexander Graham Bell and this other guy. But it was like the industry or the world was at that tipping point where it was ready for that form of invention. So I think there's an element of like, by that cross communication within the teams, you start to like uncover like, oh, well, here's where we're going. Because it's a building up process. And the other thing I want to talk about is a little bit more about that convergent thinking, because there's a process to that as well, right? So it's like
kind of bring it back together,
bring it all back together. And this is where the realist, starts to come into play, right? And it's like, okay, we've gone big, we've thought about all these different things, we've come out with just these outlandish ideas. Well, now it's time for us to reel it back in, right? So in a lot of these workshops, people have made their big list of all the different risks that they've identified within their plant or within their organization. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to go back through and, we're going to start to narrow these down. And so the process through convergent thinking is, first of all, is to stay focused, because convergent thinking, it's stressful. It literally, it's burning a lot of calories in our brain. And so our urge is to like resist or distract ourselves, to, resist pushing through this. But we also want to keep novelty alive. So we don't want to be completely shutting everything down. We still want to be able to think about, what is possible and remain positive through this process. But then also we want to evaluate against success criteria. So this is where we start to look at the reality of, is this possible? So we start to pick these viable options, and then we want to make sure that they align with the metrics that we've deemed are successful, right? And so Bob Hope used to actually do a process very similar to this. So Bob Hope had a staff of writers, and they called them the double cross and circle group. And what they would do is these writers would come up with all these jokes, and they'd write them up on a blackboard, and there might be 100 jokes up there. And Bob Hope would read through the jokes, and any jokes he laughed out loud at, he would put a cross next to it. And then he'd go back through that list again. And if he laughed the second time at the joke, he put another cross next to it. And then he'd read through the list again. And if he laughed the third time, then he circled the joke. And those were the jokes that made it onto his stand-up routine or his shows. And so that's exactly what they were doing. They were thinking divergently about all the possible jokes, and then they narrowed it down based on the criteria of, did I laugh at it 3 times in a row? And so this is the same stuff we're trying to do with our own divergent list. We have this massive list, and we go, okay, well, which of these ideas still seem pertinent? But then specifically, which of these ideas do I have direct control over, right? So I might identify an issue in legal, but I work in quality. And it's like, well, I don't have the opportunity to affect change within that specific department. So, as I look through this list, I decide which one of these areas do I have direct control over, and kind of go through that double cross and circle, trying to identify the top, 3 issues that I can start to work on. And then that becomes kind of the formulation around this food safety culture strategy of like starting to develop, how do we, now that I have these 3 specific issues and I've identified the issues, and now now we move into that next step that we were talking about earlier, which is to generate the ideas on how we can actually start to affect change with these. But all of this had to happen before we could actually start to ideate on potential solutions.
Very interesting, right? Because part of this is, right, comedians, I think, is a really good example, right? Because comedians, they all have styles, right? So Bob Hope and Jack Benny and Johnny, you're right. You know where their jokes are going to come from. Like Norm Macdonald, right? You know, it's like, hey, the old man jokes. And what the moth do? It's like when Conan O'Brien on the show is going, oh, geez, all right, Norm, what, what's going to happen next, Norm? And that was his style. But that style is overlaid with what is required to make people laugh, right? And so comedians are constantly iterating. And I think I saw Dave Chappelle talking about this with his career too, right? Was that he would write jokes and that he thought was funny, and then he would go up on stage and bomb. But he understood that was good, because now he had a piece of information that showed him not only what was funny, but what wasn't funny. So it was funny to him, which is why he put it in the show, but it wasn't funny to the people who were watching the show, right? So he's like, okay, well, all right, move on from that, right? And like Jerry Seinfeld, famous, right? Jokes. He would just have his book full of jokes, right? Constantly writing jokes, right? He was being creative and iterating and coming up with all these ideas. And then to your point, right, bringing it back and then clarifying and narrowing that back down. Very interesting.
Well, and this is a fascinating kind of conundrum that I run into a lot, is that people say, well, we want an innovative solution, right? We want something innovative, but we want to make sure we knock the ball out of the park the first time. And it's like, those two things don't live in the same reality, right? Yeah. If you want innovative, you have to have a stomach for failure. Yes. Because that's what innovation means. It means it has not been done yet. It's completely new. And so that's, that's an issue that we work with some clients, because this word innovation gets thrown around a lot. And it's like, well, let's talk about what that actually means. It means we're going to try something completely different. And that means it might fail miserably. But what we do with that data is that we learn from it. And then we find out, well, what did work, what didn't work, and then how do we affect change on the things that didn't work? Yeah. And so it's like, so innovation is a continual learning process.
Right. Huh. I mean, so there's a good example I'm thinking of right now, Austin, relative to the world of software. Oh, and by the way, Stephanie, I put the link back in for Austin's course. If you can't see that, please let me know. Worst case scenario, Austin's email. See if I can do this. Oops. Whoop, over here. Austin's email is here as well. You can reach out to Austin. And yeah, it's weird because everything's reversed, right?
Yeah. True.
And a good example of this from the software world is what they call MVP, a minimum viable product. Mm-hmm. So you come up with an idea, right? You go through all these processes as a software designer, and you come up with what you think is a good idea. But instead of just absolutely building that thing out and spending incredible amounts of money only to find out it doesn't work, or that's not what the consumers want, you put out a minimum viable product that says, hey, here's the idea we're working on for food safety. We've got this thing for tracking pictures or whatever, right? And you put it out there. And if people go, right, you stop, right? Because that's part of it too, right? And that's a good lesson for companies too, is that a lot of times it's good to kill things fast, right? If something isn't working, don't put more resources into it. Move on to something else. And this is where a creative process helps you to identify the next idea.
Yeah. And bringing this all back to the beginning of the chat, you talked about, you worked with people who, run into an issue and then they just say like, oh, well, more training, right? We have this issue and more training. And all of this process that we just kind of talked about with like the 4 stages of creative problem solving, how to run divergent thinking session, how to converge on new ideas, now leads us to, is training the answer, right? Is training necessary? Now, I make my money off of designing training and training films, but there's some times where I come in and I find out that that's not what they need, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, because training isn't always the answer. It might be an issue around, the environment and so it's like, well, training is not going to fix, your crappy hand wash stations. That's not a training issue. Now but it also helps us narrow down what type of training issue it might be. Is it a knowledge-based issue, right? Or do people simply lack information? Well, okay, well, now we know that we need to create a training specifically for knowledge. Or is it, did they lack the skill, the actual capability to do this thing, which the skills-based training is not the same as knowledge-based, right? I go to college for knowledge. I go to trade school for a skill.
Yeah.
And it's like, or is this a motivation issue? And this is really kind of, a big strong point for Sage Media. And what we do is because we're looking at a lot of the psychological aspects of, why are people not motivated, and how can we tap into those internal motivators through storytelling, through creating these training sessions that require critical thinking and ask more of people, because ultimately people want to be challenged. I refuse to believe that we are all lazy, leeches that sit around there, that we ultimately, because we talked about this, human beings want to be creative. We're always looking for new solutions, and we want to be challenged at an appropriate level, right? I don't want to be overly challenged. You throw me into a middle of a trigonometry class right now, that would be too much challenge for me. I wouldn't excel at that. So it's finding that appropriate amount of challenge, so that people have the opportunity to kind of like find their path and start to figure out what their contribution is to, food safety or whatever the particular issue is that we're working on.
Right. Well, and part of working through that, right, and kind of built into what we're talking about here is, right, this is not a one and done thing, right? This is a tool that you need to develop, and of course, with practice, you're going to get better and better. And part of this too, right, I would think, Austin, and like your comment on this too, right, is this is not something you're going to use in every single situation, right? Because if you like try and pull everybody in for a big team meeting for every complaint in a production facility, right, you're going to burn everybody out on this process. And so part of this is being choiceful around this. So in a past company I was at, one of the things that we had that would trigger investigations in the production facilities is what we called a quality alert. So we had to have 3 complaints from a product line from a particular plant and on the same line. And then we're like, there's something going on here. We need to dig a little deeper. Because if you try and do this for everything that comes up, that's going to be difficult too.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to burn out. So it's definitely finding the balance of, when the right time and place is to do this. I mean, like I said, usually whenever I'm called in, it's a more generalized, we want to work on food safety culture. And so my job is to clarify what exactly does that mean? So that we can identify, okay, have there been recalls? Was there any kind of like deep dive into why that happened? Can we look at the process within the plant? Let's interview the people and find out what their opinions are. This is where I love doing interviews with frontline team members, because that's where we start to really get some interesting data. And I say data, it's really a qualitative type of data process, right? We're listening to these interviews and we're trying to identify themes that recur. And it's like, here's, and a lot of times it's not what's being said, it's what's not being said. It's like, well, no one mentioned this. Out of 20 interviews, no one said, food safety, or no one said, this or whatever. And so we trying to find that. And that, to me, is a continuation of that creative problem solving, is that we're looking for those both innovative ideas, but looking to find the Blockbuster meets the U.S. postal system. What are these two things that need to come together to create a new innovative approach?
Yeah, and I think your example of food safety culture is a great one, because the more amorphous, the more abstract the challenge you're tackling is, the more creative you need to be, right? Because food safety culture is a big thing, right? So, and to your point earlier, Austin, which I think was a great one, was that's different for everybody, right? There's no one size fits all for this. So what does that mean in your company? And having those conversations, right, and sitting down with the clarifiers, and say, okay, guys, let's see if we can hone in on what food safety culture means. What does that mean for us? Let's try and really figure that out, right? And then moving on and say, all right, let's generate some ideas around that. How can we implement food safety culture? How can we measure food safety culture? How do we teach food safety culture, right? How do these things fit in, right? This is just not something for the plants. This is corporate. This is everybody. What does that mean? And then to your point, then coming back after that divergent, right? Coming back into the convergent piece of it and saying, okay, we're getting a good idea for this, right? So how do we now start implementing action around this, right? And that's key, right? Because we can sit around and talk about these things, till we all retire. If you don't implement, right, you have to do that, right? And guess what? To your point, your implementation may work, it may not, right? The more you put into this, the greater your chances of it succeeding. But just like the software, right? Get out there and tinker, get out there and try, and this works and this doesn't work, right? We don't have to be omnipotent relative to this, right? We don't have to be able to immediately reach that future point, which is the point you made earlier, right? Is, oh, okay, well, you guys go be creative and I want your solution in 2 weeks and with an execution plan and tell me what the budget is, right? All right. So now we're back into the old model. It's like, no, that doesn't work. So,
I was gonna say also, going back to the food safety culture thing, I think it's become such this nebulous topic that my goal is also to bring it back down to earth and be like, well, what does that actually mean? And then as a learning designer, saying, okay, if we're looking to improve food safety culture through some type of educational program, my first step is, what's the business outcome that we want to achieve? What is the KPI, right?
Yeah.
Because I've got to be able to sell this to leadership as well. Hopefully by the time I get the call, leadership's already been kind of sold on this idea and they're ready to move forward. But sometimes we have to create the case, right? To be able to say, okay, so here's the KPI that we're looking to affect as a result of improved food safety culture, or as a result of this improved behavior. And so that's the other thing that I'm always looking for, is identifying observable, measurable behaviors that will affect food safety culture and ultimately affect the KPI or the business outcome. But all of this divergent, convergent thinking brings us to that point of like, now we've really honed in on what we're focused on what the issue is. And then now what's the business case for that thing, right?
Yeah, there's nothing worse. And I think, Austin, this kind of applies at a personal and a business level as well. Once you think you already know all the answers, you're dead, right? You're never going to progress. You're never going to advance. If anything, you're going to go backwards, right? And things are going to happen that you don't like if that's your attitude, right? And we've seen this again with companies and people. We can all, I'm sure, think of people in our past that had that model, and they weren't very successful at it, right? So part of it is being open and understanding that, I don't have all the answers, but let's investigate this with other people with skill attributes and sets that we can collaborate with to try and see if we can figure this dude out. Humility
definitely goes a long way. And I think that's one of the great things, I don't know, to my own horn, that I bring to the table, is that I have the opportunity to come into a company and ask the most ridiculous questions because I don't know your operation. And so I can ask all those dumb questions that everybody else is probably intimidated to ask because it would look foolish. I'm fine looking foolish. Because what I usually find is that people go, wow, no one's ever asked that. We haven't thought about that before. Like, it's just assumed that this is the way. So yeah, like having that level of humility to question everything and be like, well, why is it done this way? And how could it be improved? And once again, that leads to that, how do we think of every possible way to improve this process and then figure out a solution? But if you think you've got all the answers, then it leaves no room for creative innovation.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So I've been working in quality assurance and food safety in the food industry, for decades, right? I have to recognize that gives me a certain mindset, right? And being willing to work outside of that box. And to your point, it can be uncomfortable. It takes a ton of brain power, but man, if you stick to it and you work hard at this, you're going to be successful, right? It's only a matter of time. So I think that's a great way to kind of end this conversation and bring this back up. And again, the food safety culture design workshop, right? This is just a small, just a taste of what you're doing in this course. And again, right, the link is in the comments here. So hopefully everybody can see that link. The locals link for the communities in there as well. And if you want to as well, right, reach out, right? Austin's always available. Send him an email. I am as well. We're happy to help. That's why we're here, right? We love doing this and sharing our knowledge. And that's how we all get better. So thank you again, Austin. It's all, every time you're on here, you make me think a little bit more, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome.
That's something
Sure
we all
thing,
need.
man.
Yep.
It's great.
So everybody, thank you for joining us as well, right? You make this worthwhile. This is why we're here. And I love it when I go to conferences and people come up to me and say, I've seen your food safety chat on LinkedIn, right? That gives me energy, right? That shows that this is worthwhile and that we're helping. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. So join us back here next week at the same time on Friday. So 8 a.m. Mountain, 10 a.m. Eastern. And next week, if everything goes according to plan, he's a busy guy. Next week, Bill Marler is going to be on the show. So I'm really excited about that. Bill joins us about once a year. So we'll start planning out what we're going to be talking about early next week, and we'll sit down with Bill. So if you're going to check in, right, make sure and be here next week as well, and see what Bill has to say, what's going on in the world of food safety from a lawyer standpoint. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. We will see you next week, and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again, Austin. You have a good one too.
All right. You too, man. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.